everybody. Welcome to today's live Zoo to You at Stone Zoo. I'm Jen. We're also going to be joined by Brian here in a little bit, who's going to be helping us out. And we are here at our Alligator Exhibit at Stone Zoo. Now, maybe used to seeing some larger alligators if you've come to visit us in the past. But this year we actually have 4 little babies in here. If you saw our Facebook a couple days ago, we actually posted a video of some of them making their way to our new home. But these alligators actually used to be ambassador animals that we use for educational programs and encounters. And they just happened to outgrow their little exhibits that we had them in. So we had this nice big exhibit and we figured, why not use it, give them a nice big home that they could swim around in and have lots and lots of room. So these 4 guys, they would actually stay together in the wild as well. Baby alligators tend to stay in small pods with one another for about the first 3 years of their life or so. So sometimes we do see these little guys hanging out together, as 3 of them are right now in the back, which is actually really, really cute. One of the biggest questions that we get is, what is the difference between an alligator and a crocodile? The species that we have here are all American alligators. There's actually 2 different species of alligator in the world, the American alligator and the Chinese alligator. American alligators are the ones that are found right here in North America, more in the southeastern part of the United States. So from Florida up to North Carolina and then over to Texas. There are actually 13 different species of crocodile, believe it or not. But I actually have some skulls, and we're going to take a look at the differences in those skulls. So alligators tend to have more of a U-shaped snout. It's a little bit wider. Also, if you take a look at their teeth, you're going to notice that you can only really see those top teeth hanging down. Crocodiles, on the other hand, their snouts tend to be a little bit more narrow. They're a little bit pointier. It's more of a V shape. And if you take a look at their teeth, you'll notice that you can see actually both top teeth hanging down and bottom teeth sticking up right there. So those are 2 probably the easiest ways. If you happen to see one of their heads, you can take a look at the shape of that snout and also what kind of teeth you can see poking out there. So Brian is actually going to head into our alligator exhibit. Don't try this at home. He's going to go in and see if he can actually get one of our baby alligators to maybe bring a little bit closer to show you guys. While he's doing that, we can actually take a look at some of their teeth that we have too. So one thing that's really interesting about alligator teeth is that they are hollow on the inside. So these are actually real alligator teeth that I have in my hands. And alligators lose their teeth throughout their entire lifetime, much of the same way that sharks do. Unlike sharks that have rows of teeth, alligators' teeth are going to be stacked sort of like cups or like cones. So one tooth is going to fit right into the other one. When they lose this tooth, there's already one right underneath ready to replace it. They can go through about 3,000 teeth in their lifetime, believe it or not. All right, so Brian actually has one of our little guys up here.
Hey everyone, this here is Pickle, again, one of our smaller American alligators. Definitely on the younger side, probably about 2 years old, somewhere in between 2 and 3. You can tell an alligator's age roughly by how long they are. So this one, about 2, maybe 2.5 to 3 feet long, so probably somewhere within the 2 to 3 age range. Again, as Jen said, we do have 4. It's kind of difficult to tell them apart, but they do definitely have their own little individual markings and stuff like this. You can see they have these stripes on the back. That is a good way for these guys to camouflage, because when they're this small, they do still have some natural predators. Large birds, big mammals, even larger alligators will go after baby alligators. So these guys got to stay safe by having these markings on their backs and sides. They tend to lose their markings as they grow up. Some of them don't. But as an alligator does get bigger, it's not going to have as many natural predators. So usually they don't need to hide as much and are good to just kind of stay in the water all day, stay beneath the surface, and they mostly become a predator less of a prey. You can see he's got his mouth open right now. That's actually a form of thermoregulation. That's kind of like a dog panting or a human being sweating, probably like I am right now. That's how they cool down. These guys are cold-blooded, meaning they don't regulate their body heat the same way that we do. They kind of have to rely on the environment around them. So he's keeping his mouth open a little bit. It's going to cool him down on a hot day like today. He can also just stay in the water, but he's too busy being a star right now. You can see all those teeth that Jen was talking about earlier. Even at this small age, they do have very sharp teeth, and there are somewhere between 60 and 80 of them in their mouth at one time. So, as Jen said, they lose a lot over the course of their lifetime, but they regrow pretty quickly afterwards.
Now, kind of talking about some of their really cool adaptations, because alligators do spend a lot of time in the water. You might be able to see some of them swimming around in the background behind me right now. They have some really cool adaptations to help them out when they are swimming. I'm sure you guys on a hot day like today probably like going swimming in the pool as well. If you do, I'm sure you don't like getting water in your throat or your ears or your nose or your eyes. And the same is actually true with our baby alligators. So believe it or not, they have flaps that can close off their ears. They have flaps that can close off their nostrils right on top there. And right inside their mouth, if you actually look, you can't see down his throat because he has a flap that's closing off his throat to keep any water from getting in there, swallowing any water that he might not want to swallow. Now they also have built-in swimming goggles, which I think is one of the coolest things. So they do have eyelids, they can close their eyes, but they have a separate lens called a nictitating membrane that's actually going to move from front to back. It will cover the alligator's eyes, much like a swimming goggle, just to protect it when they are underwater. It's really, really cool.
They also are very strong swimmers. They've got a very large muscly tail that you can see right here, which kind of flattens out. That helps them paddle along through the water pretty quickly, but also pretty quietly. And their back feet are pretty webbed. That allows them to get a good kick, and they can move pretty rapidly when they need to. These guys are mostly sit and wait predators. So typically they kind of stay in one place and wait for food to come to them. But if they need to grab something that's moving quickly, they definitely can. They can swim very fast, and they can actually move on land pretty quickly too.
Right, do we have any questions that have come in?
Sure. So maybe Jen, can you tell us what do these alligators eat at the zoo and what do they eat in the wild?
Absolutely. So right now, this size, these guys are just eating mice. When they get a little bit larger, we would feed them things like larger rats. But at the moment, they're eating about 4 or 5 mice a couple of times a week. In the wild, again, at this size, they would be eating similar things, amphibians, so like frogs, they'd be eating some smaller turtles, some fish that they might be able to catch. And then as they get bigger, they're going to move on to larger prey. Raccoons are a big part of their diet, birds, sometimes snakes, and anything that kind of comes to the water's edge just to get a drink.
And Linda has asked a good question. Linda wants to know, what is the zoo going to do with them when it gets cold?
Great question. So obviously up here in New England, these guys can't stay out year round. It does get way too cold for them. So more than likely they will go back down south to a place in South Carolina. Again, they are small enough too that if we did need to move them inside, we do have some larger sort of indoor pools that we could put them in. But they would have nice warm areas in the wintertime.
Sounds great. And maybe a question for Brian. So we have a question from Steve.
Ooh, fantastic.
Steve wants to know, how much time do they spend on the land?
So they typically, as he moves around a little bit,
Yep.
They typically spend most of their time near the water. That's going to alternate between going in the water and going on land. I'm going to call attention to the noise he's making really quick. Kind of cute. That's probably a call for this baby alligator's mom. So looking for a little bit of help, but they usually calm down pretty quick. But going back, they tend to spend most of their time right near water's edge. It's typically split pretty much between in and out of the water, but it also does depend on tons of factors like the weather outside. Again, if it's really hot, they're going to be spending more time in the water, and if it's a little cooler, they're going to be basking more on the land. So there's not a set number for all throughout the year. But it depends on the conditions, the alligator, the area they're in. They're usually found very close to the water, usually in swampy, murky water. That's where these guys like to hang out the most.
Right. And maybe one of you could tell us, how big can an alligator grow?
Sure. So it depends on if it's a male or a female. Males do tend to grow a little bit larger than females do, which is one of the ways that you can kind of tell them apart when they do get older. Males can actually grow up to 15 feet long and weigh over 600 pounds. I believe the largest one on record was around 19 feet and well over 1,000 pounds. Females are going to be a little bit smaller than that. Females don't typically grow much larger than about 10 feet and about 300 pounds or so.
And at what age would an alligator be considered full grown?
So they're considered full grown when they're about 10 feet or so. They do tend to leave. I mentioned earlier that they do hang out in pods with other alligators for about the first 3 years. When they hit that sort of 4-foot mark, they are considered pretty safe from any other predator, so they will venture off on their own at that point. But they still have a lot of growing to do. You know, as Brian mentioned, they do grow about 1 foot a year for this first 10 years of their life. So once they hit that 10-foot mark, you know, it sort of slows down at that point.
Well, I think as our friend is letting us know, our time is just about up.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, for tuning in. And again, if you haven't had a chance to come and visit us at the zoo, we are open and we would love to see you. All right. Thanks. Bye.
You want to get a close-up as this one goes?
Sure.